good name, man. Don't call it soft. Don't call it soft. It's Cadillac. This is what you call Cadillac. I say, man, I don't want to be in no motherfucking Cadillac. I want to get out. Take that trash out on your way outside. Oh, this is my son. This ain't no regular 29-year-old man. This is my son.
So I'm out here dating now, you know. So sometimes I get approached by younger women, little 25-year-old, 30-year-olds. They got too much energy. Want to go 2 places in one day. Bitch, I'm not parking twice.
6 years behind bars, surrounded by murderers, drug dealers, and the worst humanity has to offer. 19 years old, life over before it even began. That was Ali Siddiq. Today, that same man is on the biggest stages in the world, making millions of people laugh until they cry, being called one of the greatest living storytellers in comedy. How the hell did this happen? If you stay until the end of this video, you'll discover not only the most insane redemption story you've ever heard, but you'll also understand why being authentic, why embracing your scars instead of hiding them, is the only real path to success. And look, if you've never heard of Ali Siddiq, you're literally missing one of the most powerful phenomena in current culture. So stick around, subscribe to this channel right now, turn on notifications, because every week I bring stories of people who defied all odds, and I guarantee you won't want to miss the next one. Now tell me something quick. Have you ever watched an Ali Siddiq show? Have you seen that prison special of his? Comment down below, because I bet after this video you're going to run to binge everything he's done. And if you already know him, comment too, so we know there are good people here. Alright, now sit down, because the story is long, it's intense, and it's going to move you. Houston, Texas, 80s and 90s. If you don't know this city, let me give you the context real quick. Infernal heat, brutal inequality, black communities abandoned by the system, drugs flooding the streets, and an entire generation of young people being swallowed by violence and mass incarceration. Ali Siddiq was born right in the middle of all that. No silver spoon, no connections, no one opening doors for him. What he had was a working mother trying to hold the family together, a neighborhood where his friends were dying or getting locked up before 20, and a country that had already decided what the destiny of boys like him would be before they even had a chance to choose. And man, Ali did exactly what the system expected him to do. He got into crime. Started selling drugs as a teenager, because that seemed to be the only way to have some money, some respect, some sense of control over his own life. He wasn't thinking about consequences, wasn't planning the future, was just surviving in the only world he knew. And then came the fall. 19 years old, a police operation, and suddenly Ali Siddiq was handcuffed, prosecuted, convicted, 6 years in prison. 6 years inside one of the toughest penitentiaries in Texas, a place where men entered and many didn't leave, at least not whole. Now imagine you at 19 years old, the age when many people are starting college, thinking about parties, relationships, discovering who they are, and you're being thrown into a cell with people who committed violent crimes, who have nothing to lose, in an environment where every second you need to prove you're not weak, that you won't be a victim. Most people would go into pure survival mode, would do the time counting the days, would leave broken, traumatized, with even fewer chances in life than when they entered. But Ali Siddiq, even without knowing it at the time, was doing something different. He was observing. He was studying every person who crossed his path, every absurd situation, every moment of unexpected humanity in that hell. He was archiving stories. And more importantly, he was learning to tell them. Inside prison, Ali discovered he had a natural talent for making people laugh. He started telling stories to other inmates, transforming the brutal routine of that place into something bearable through humor. He noticed the timing, the way to build a narrative, how to take something terrible and find in it the absurd, the human, the universal, that made other men, even in the worst moments of their lives, let out a real laugh. These 6 years, which could have completely destroyed Ali Siddiq, ended up becoming the foundation of everything he would build, because when he finally got out of prison, he didn't leave as the same person who entered. He left with brutal clarity about who he was, about what mattered, about the power of stories. And he left with a decision that many people around him thought was completely crazy. He was going to be a comedian, an ex-convict black man, without formal education, without connections in the entertainment industry, without anything but stories and courage, decided he was going to compete in one of the toughest markets that exists. Because comedy is no joke. It's one of the most brutal jobs in the world. You're alone on a stage, exposed, vulnerable, trying to make strangers laugh, being judged every second, and if you fail, if your jokes don't work, everyone sees, everyone knows. And for a black man with a prison record, the barriers were 1,000 times greater. But Ali started the way everyone starts, from absolute zero. He went after any stage that would accept putting him there. Empty bars in Houston, open mic nights where the audience was more interested in drinking than listening to comedy, places where you had 5 minutes to prove your worth, and if you failed, you were immediately discarded. And in the early days, Ali failed a lot. There were nights when no one laughed, nights when he forgot his lines, nights when the audience was hostile, when people mocked him before he even opened his mouth. But prison had taught Ali a fundamental lesson. You endure. You don't give up. You continue even when everything seems impossible. So every night he came back, a little better, a little more refined, learning which story worked and which didn't, understanding rhythm, understanding audience, transforming himself into a craftsman of words. And slowly, very slowly, things started to change. People started to notice there was a different guy in the Houston comedy circuit, someone who wasn't doing the usual generic humor, wasn't recycling old jokes, wasn't trying to imitate Eddie Murphy or Chris Rock or any of the greats. Ali Siddiq had his own voice, completely unique, completely authentic. He told long, complex stories with developed characters, with narrative arcs, with tension and comic relief perfectly orchestrated. And most importantly, he told his truth. He wasn't ashamed of the time he spent in prison, didn't hide where he came from, didn't try to be palatable for anyone's comfort. He got on stage and said, "This is my story, these are my scars, and if you give it a chance, I'm going to take you on a journey you'll never forget." This authenticity, this refusal to dilute himself, could have destroyed his career before it even began. Because the comedy industry, like Hollywood, like most of American entertainment, has its own unwritten rules about who deserves success and how they should behave. There's an expectation, especially for black comedians, that they do a certain type of humor, talk about certain topics in certain ways, not be too threatening, not be too political, not be too real. There's constant pressure to fit into molds that were created by and for a predominantly white audience. And Ali Siddiq looked at those expectations and said, "No thanks." He was going to tell his stories his way, was going to talk about the experience of being a black man in America, about the criminal justice system, about growing up in abandoned communities, about everything he lived through, without filter, without apologies. This decision came at a high cost. There were years where Ali was doing show after show, building a passionate fan base, but the big opportunities weren't coming. He wasn't getting the TV specials, wasn't being called for the famous talk shows, wasn't receiving the contracts that comedians with half his talent were getting. And why? Because TV executives looked at him and said his material was too specific, that it focused too much on the black experience, that mainstream audiences wouldn't connect. What they were really saying, without explicitly stating it, is that they didn't know how to market a black man who refused to make concessions, who insisted on telling stories about prison, about race, about realities that made people uncomfortable. But here's the thing about true authenticity, about art that comes from a genuine place. Eventually, it finds its audience. It might take years, it might take decades, but if you keep going, if you maintain integrity, if you don't give up, people will find you. And that's exactly what happened with Ali. While the doors of the traditional industry remained closed, he was building something much more powerful, a real connection with real people. His shows started to sell out, not because of advertising or marketing, but by word of mouth. Someone would watch Ali Siddiq and leave that experience transformed, so they'd tell 5 friends who'd tell 5 friends each, and suddenly there was a line to see this comedian that television was still ignoring. And then came the moment that changed everything, the project that would put Ali Siddiq on the map definitively. It's bigger than these bars. This isn't just a comedy special, it's a masterpiece of narrative. It's oral literature at the highest level. It's one of the most extraordinary pieces of performance you'll see in any medium. Ali took his experience in prison, these 6 years that could have been just trauma and shame, and transformed it into an epic story, funny, devastating, completely human. He takes you inside that Texas penitentiary, makes you feel the heat, the tension, the constant danger. He introduces unforgettable characters, inmates with complex personalities, guards who are both oppressors and human, situations that are simultaneously absurd and terrible. And through all of this, he makes you laugh. It's not an uncomfortable or forced laugh. It's a genuine laugh because Ali has this magical ability to find comedy in tragedy, to show that even in the darkest places, humanity persists, absurdity happens, life continues. But It's Bigger Than These Bars is more than entertainment. It's a political manifesto disguised as comedy. Without preaching, without making speeches, just by telling his story, Ali Siddiq forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about the American criminal justice system, about mass incarceration, about how society treats black men especially, about how people are discarded and then expected to fail when they're finally released. He shows that inmates aren't one-dimensional monsters. They're complex people who made bad decisions, often because they didn't have real other options, and who deserve a chance at redemption. And he proves this by being his own living evidence, by being an example that change is possible, that people can grow, that a past doesn't have to define a future. When It's Bigger Than These Bars was finally released, the response was explosive. Comedy critics, who are usually hard to impress, were amazed. They compared Ali to the great storytellers in history, said he was doing something that transcended traditional comedy, that entered the territory of performance art. And more importantly, the audience responded massively. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Ali Siddiq, sharing clips of him, quoting his stories. People who had never thought about criminal justice were having conversations about system reform because of his comedy. People who had prejudices about ex-convicts were being forced to reconsider because they were connecting so deeply with this person they theoretically should judge and discard. And here's one of the most beautiful things about Ali Siddiq's success. He opened doors not just for himself, but for an entire generation of artists who had been told their voices were too specific, too problematic, too different. He proved you don't need to dilute yourself to be successful, that in fact, your specificity, your difference, your authenticity is exactly what makes you valuable. He showed that audiences are smarter and more open than executives give them credit for, that people from all backgrounds can connect with honest stories, even when those stories come from experiences they've never personally lived. Today, Ali Siddiq is at the top of American comedy. He performs in sold-out theaters around the country, appears on famous podcasts, has multiple specials, is respected by his peers as one of the best working today. But what's most impressive is that he maintained his integrity completely. He didn't change his style to fit market expectations, didn't abandon the communities he came from, didn't start doing safe and generic humor now that he's successful. If anything, he's even more committed to telling real stories, to using his platform to talk about important issues, to being a voice for people who usually don't have a voice. And look, there's a profound lesson in this whole story that goes far beyond comedy. We live in an era where everyone is trying to be palatable, trying not to offend anyone, trying to fit into algorithms and please as many people as possible. And the result is, everything becomes generic, superficial, forgettable. Ali Siddiq took the opposite path. He went deeply specific, intensely personal, refused compromises, and ended up creating something universal. Because when you tell your truth with skill and honesty, when you're not afraid to show your scars, when you transform your pain into art, people recognize that. They may not have lived your specific experience, but they recognize the authenticity, they feel the real human connection. Think with me for a second. Ali Siddiq could have left prison and become another statistic. He could have gone back to crime, ended up back in jail or dead. Those were the options the system expected of him, the options that were most likely statistically. Or he could have tried to hide his past, create a false persona, try to be accepted by pretending to be someone he wasn't. Many ex-convicts who try to enter respectable industries do exactly that. Hide their history, lie in interviews, live in constant fear of being discovered. But Ali chose a third path, the most difficult, the riskiest, but also the only truly liberating one. He completely embraced who he was, where he came from, what he had lived. He transformed the thing society said was his greatest shame into his greatest strength. And man, the courage that requires cannot be underestimated. Because every time Ali gets on a stage and starts telling stories about his prison time, he's putting himself in a position of judgment. He knows there are people in the audience who have prejudices about ex-convicts, who will look at him with suspicion, who have already decided who he is before he opens his mouth. And even so, he tells his stories with dignity, with humor, with humanity. He doesn't apologize for what he did when he was young, but he doesn't glorify it either. He simply presents the truth. Here's who I was. Here are the choices I made. Here are the consequences. Here's who I became. And by doing this, he not only frees himself, he frees everyone who hears him, because he gives permission for people to be human, to have complicated pasts, to make mistakes and still have value. There's also a racial dimension to this story that can't be ignored. Ali Siddiq is a black man in America, and everything that implies. He grew up in a country where young black men are criminalized from childhood, where they're followed in stores, stopped by police for no reason, suspected by default. He entered a criminal justice system that was literally designed to imprison black people at disproportionate rates, that gives harsher sentences for crimes committed by black people than by whites, that offers fewer opportunities for rehabilitation, fewer chances of success after release. And then he tried to enter an industry, comedy, that has historically been dominated by whites, where black comedians constantly have to fight to be taken seriously, to receive the same resources, the same attention, the same respect. Ali Siddiq was fighting against all these forces simultaneously and still won, not because he ignored race, but because he confronted it directly, because he made his experience as a black man an essential part of his art. And you know what's fascinating? Ali conquered absolutely diverse audiences. You put him in front of a completely white audience in a small conservative town, and he'll have those people laughing, connecting, caring. You put him in front of an urban, predominantly black audience. Same thing. You put him in front of college professors or factory workers or any other group, and it works. Why? Because in the end, Ali is talking about universal human experience. Struggle, survival, redemption, finding humor in the worst situations, the need to be seen and heard. Everyone can relate to that, regardless of their background. But he reaches that universal by going through the specific, not avoiding it. There's a story Ali tells that perfectly exemplifies this. He talks about how in prison there was a complex hierarchy, unwritten rules you needed to learn fast or suffer the consequences. He talks about how he had to navigate these systems, how he had to prove he wasn't weak but without being too aggressive, how he had to form alliances but without seeming desperate. And as he tells this, you realize he's really talking about life in general, about how we all navigate social hierarchies, how we all try to find our place, how we all have to figure out who we are in hostile environments. Prison is just an extreme and condensed version of dynamics that exist everywhere. In offices, in schools, in families. So you're laughing at the absurd situations he describes, but you're also recognizing something deeply true about human nature. Another fascinating dimension of Ali's work is how he humanizes people society prefers to dehumanize. When he talks about other inmates, he doesn't portray them as villains or one-dimensional victims. He shows their complexity, the contradictions, the humanity. There's a guy who committed violent crimes but makes the smartest jokes. There's another who looks threatening, but is actually deeply sensitive. There are guards who are part of the oppressive system, but who also have their own struggles and humanity. Ali forces you to see these people as complete, as worthy of empathy, even when they've done terrible things. And this is radical, because the dominant narrative about prisons in the United States is that we're dealing with monsters, with fundamentally broken people who need to be permanently discarded from society. Ali shows that this is a convenient lie that allows society to ignore its own failures, ignore how we create conditions that push people into crime, ignore our collective responsibility. And look, I'm not romanticizing anything here. Ali doesn't do that either. He doesn't say everyone in prison is innocent, or that crimes don't have real consequences. He openly admits he did bad things, that he hurt his community by selling drugs, that he deserved to face consequences. But he also shows the context, shows the conditions that created those choices, shows that punishment without rehabilitation serves no one, that a system that permanently discards people is failing in its own stated objectives. And he does all this through comedy, through making these difficult truths palatable, through making you laugh while simultaneously planting seeds of questioning that will grow in your consciousness long after the show ends. Now let's talk about his technique, because Ali Siddiq isn't just a storyteller, he's a master craftsman. If you study his performance, you'll notice incredible things. First, he has absolute control of timing. He knows exactly when to pause, when to speed up, when to let a silence breathe. He builds tension methodically, layer by layer, taking you to a point where you're completely invested, and then he releases with a devastating punchline or an emotional revelation. Second, he uses sensory details brilliantly. When he describes prison, you can feel the Texas heat. You can hear the sounds of metal doors slamming. You can smell it. This isn't an accident. It's technique refined through thousands of performances. Third, he develops characters with depth you rarely see in stand-up. Every person in his stories has a distinct voice, their own personality, complex motivations. You remember them, care about them, even though they're people he met for just a few moments decades ago. And there's something else that separates Ali: vulnerability. Many comedians use humor as armor, as a way to maintain emotional distance, to not expose themselves too much. Ali does the opposite. He's willing to show his moments of fear, weakness, doubt. He tells about being 19 and being terrified his first night in prison, about moments where he didn't know if he would survive, about the shame he felt when his mother visited him behind that glass. And this vulnerability doesn't make him weak. It makes his art more powerful, because he's giving the audience permission to be vulnerable too, to admit their own fears and failures, to be completely human. So when you put it all together, extraordinary technique with radical authenticity, with courageous vulnerability, with deeply human stories, you have something really special. You have art that transcends entertainment and becomes something transformative. And that's why Ali Siddiq isn't just another successful comedian. He's a cultural phenomenon. He's someone who's changing how we think about comedy, about narrative, about who deserves to be heard and what stories deserve to be told. And man, look where he started and where he is now. From a prison cell in Texas to the biggest stages in the world, from being discarded by the system to critics calling him a genius, from having no hope to being inspiration for millions. If that's not proof that redemption is possible, that you can transcend your circumstances, that authenticity wins in the end, I don't know what is. Ali Siddiq took the worst years of his life and transformed them into art, into success, into meaning. He proved that no one is defined by the worst they've ever done, that we all deserve chances to change, that stories matter more than stereotypes. So if you didn't know Ali Siddiq before this video, now you do. And I guarantee you'll want to see his work. You'll want to experience this transformative comedy firsthand. Start with, "It's bigger than these bars." Let Ali take you on this journey through prison, feel his magic as a storyteller, and then explore the rest of his material, because each special, each performance has this same combination of intelligent humor with emotional depth, with social commentary. And now tell me in the comments, did you already know Ali's work? Are you going to look for it now? What did you think of this redemption story? And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because every week I bring stories like this, of people who defied all expectations and changed the game. Until next time.